I know a lot of you out there, and so thank you for showing up. Those of you whom I have never met, I am particularly gratified. I appreciate it. Um, I'm wearing my Neville Brothers T-shirt. How many of y'all know what that is? Got some thumbs up out there. Well, the Neville Brothers are are the ultimate New Orleans band. They no longer exist because two of the four of them have regrettably passed away. But if you've ever been to New Orleans and listened to the music, been to Jazz Fest or Mardi Gras, or just been there, the city has a rhythm. It's like a heartbeat, and you know it when you're there. And I'm not making it up. I'm not being dramatic or supernatural. It is a city, probably a lot like New York, in that it has its own energy, and it's something it's tactile. In New Orleans, it's very much a musical rhythm sort of thing. You can't go anywhere in New Orleans without the music being part of your experience. And it's music like no place else on earth. It is music indigenous to itself. And I fell in love with it at an early age when my parents took me and my sister on vacation. A lot of people, their mom and dad might say, "Oh, you kids are 10 and 12 now, and I'll bet you would enjoy Disneyland." My parents said, "Y'all ever heard of Bourbon Street?" So we go down to New Orleans, and I'm about 14, and my dad said, "I'm going to take you to a club called the Famous Door, and you'll see Al Hurt, this great trumpet player." And we go down Bourbon Street, and if you've ever been there at night, about half the doors are open to the bars, which line the street. And frankly, there's a lot of nudists in there. And at the age of 14, I thought, I'm liking this place. So we get to the Famous Door. Dad slips the doorman $20 to let me go in and watch Al Hurt because I was considerably younger than I should have been. And it sort of changed my life. And I've spent as much time in New Orleans as I can. I wrote a book called Louisiana Music, where I got to spend a year doing nothing but going to festivals and events and talking to hundreds of musicians down there. I tell you all of this because Gris-Gris Gumbo is very much a novel about New Orleans unto itself. And I want the music and the atmosphere to be on every page. And I hope that it is. It is to me. And I wrote the book 20 years ago when I had a literary agent. And he said, "Yeah, we can sell this." And the reason I wrote it was because Eileen and I had moved up here and we hadn't been back to New Orleans. We still haven't been back since Katrina. And I thought, this is a great way to just go on vacation back to New Orleans in my own brain. And I just got up at 5 every morning and I wrote, and I was there. I had the music going and I had that incense burning. And that's a cool way to write a book, I think. And it put me there, and I got the book done. And then my agent, who thought he had sold it twice, said both of these things fell through. And so the book went on the shelf, and it stayed that way for a long, long time. And I wrote other books, and some of them were published and some of them weren't. And I lost that agent, lost the other agent I had, and I had more or less forgotten about it. And I saw an open submission at this small horror press. And I said, it was Halloween week. And they said, "Send us your horror novel." And I said, "What the hell?" So I did. And They bought the damn thing. So out of nowhere, Gris-Gris Gumbo came back to life, zombie-like, if you will. And I had to reread it, which I hadn't done. And I realized it is a horror novel. I love horror novels. I love to be scared. I don't like the gratuitous horror novels. I want there to be a message. I want it to be reflective of something cultural or societal or personal that's going on. And I realized that Gris-Gris Gumbo, at the heart of it, is about friendship. And it's about a coming of age and a friendship that doesn't last because one of the two guys, who has been sort of a nerd all of his life and never been popular with women or anything, he stumbles into a situation where he disrupts the power of voodoo, which, by the way, in New Orleans is a very real religion. It is a real faith. It's estimated that as much as 30% of the people that live there follow voodoo. Back in the time of Marie Laveau, the most famous voodooienne that ever was, she used to go into the Garden District, and rich Southern women would pay her to put spells on. Now, whether Marie believed in it, I'm sure she believed in it, but whether she believed in the power of casting spells or not might have been just a good carnival scam. I don't know. But the novel is about voodoo and how it comes between friendship. And I did a lot of research on voodoo. I talked to a lot of people that practice voodoo. I hung out in voodoo shops down there. There's two kinds of voodoo shops down there. One is the one that you find in the French Quarter, which targets tourists, and you go buy voodoo dolls or weird powders or whatever, or just sort of tchotchke, sort of stuff you'd take home and give to your neighbor to prove that you went to New Orleans or whatever. And then outside of the French Quarter is the real voodoo shops for the people that actually do practice voodoo. And here's the secret about that. There is the dark element that my novel is centered around, but 95% of it is just a faith like anybody else. They're believing in a beneficent God and doing their best to appease that God and try to walk the straight and narrow. There's no fun in that. So I wrote about the dark voodoo of it, and the damn book came out a year ago, and I sort of didn't know what to do with an independent book. Eileen, my wife here, who line edits, copy edits, everything I write, is harsh when I don't want to be harsh, says that scene goes on 20 pages too long. And invariably, she's right. And of course, if you do sell the book and it goes to a publisher, then it will be edited. But I don't have that anymore. I don't have three of my books came out from quote unquote major publishing houses. And I had that. But with this, they gave it a cursory look. Eileen and I looked it back over and it came out. There was no support from the publisher like they had said they would give us. No distribution in a lot of the bookstores. Don't get me wrong, I was really happy the book came out after I had long given up on it. And it's fun to look at and leaf through and stuff. But, and I'm gonna ask a friend of mine who happens to be here tonight, who has gone through, have any of you written a book and tried to sell it before? It is the most punishing, brutal process that there is. It's one thing to write a book, and that's hard. It is hard, and as an arts writer at the day that gets a large amount of self-published novels from people, some of them are written by people who I have all the credit or all the respect in the world for, because it is hard to write a book, and they did it, and they got to the end and they typed the end, and man, is that hard. Having said that, not to be harsh, a lot of these people are not writers. They didn't have the benefit maybe of going to take writing classes or an editor, et cetera, et cetera. And they went into it blind and they wrote the book. And I have all the respect in the world for them. Maybe they went so far as to try to say, I'm going to get an agent, because that's what you got to do. You can't get a book deal without an agent. So you start a querying process, and of the hundreds of literary agents out there, it's not just enough to have a query letter. You have to tailor it for that specific agent. So you go on their website and say, what do they want? They'll tell you. You say, all right, they want a sample of 5 pages. Maybe they want the whole manuscript. Maybe they want an outline and a synopsis plus 14 pages. And I think they have a network where they make sure with each other that none of us are going to ask for the same thing. So this poor SOB out there has to change every query submission to fit just me. The last agent I had, I got after 202 rejections. That's what it's like. That's the reality of it. So, and by the way, after he submitted the book in question, not Gris-Gris Gumbo, to 30 people, 30 editors at 30 publishing houses, he said, you know what, Rick, I don't think this is going to work. That's 2 years down the drain of that. That's the reality of it. And I'm meandering a little bit because there I am stuck with no publishing house to support me. Eileen and I spent a not inconsiderable sum of money trying to get the book in the hands of prominent and not so prominent people that would review it, get it into niche bookstores that worked with dark fiction or horror fiction. That took months to do that. We got no response, none. So you know what? I'm really happy you guys are here, and thank you. And what I was going to do was, my good friend Alyssa Bass is sitting right there. She was my boss at the Day for a long time, and she is going through this process right now with her book, the very wonderful Happy Hour. Would you agree? Have I painted an accurate portrait of what we're doing here?
Yes.
You've taken
It's a soul-sucking process.
soul-sucking.
To try to go the traditional publishing route. And after you put your soul into your work, and then they suck your soul out trying to get somebody to publish it, you had a publisher, I published it myself. I'm a very impatient person. I spent 6 weeks trying to get an agent, 14 pages, first 3 paragraphs, last 3 paragraphs, the middle 7 chapters, your mother's maiden name. It was ridiculous. So I quit that and just did it myself.
But you know what? Alyssa is spectacular at social media, and I am not. And you're doing really well, and I congratulate you. And so y'all watch out for Alyssa Bass and Happy Hour, and you need to buy it. It's going to make you laugh, and it will make you sad. And like Alyssa and I, it will make you feel old. So anyway, so I have this horror novel. It's about voodoo in New Orleans, and it's about friendship. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about it, or about publishing, or about, as I started to suspect standing up here, the Neville Brothers shirt is a little smaller than I thought it was. A little more sausage-like so yeah, I don't really have a big dog and pony show. I just was trying to tell you what it's like to write a novel, go through the process, and at the end of the day, you're pretty damn proud that you wrote it anyway. So any questions from anyone? Yes, sir.
About how long does it take you to write those books end to end?
Gris-Gris Gumbo took me about 2 years. The first edit of it was 900 pages long, which is probably 3 times as long as any publisher. At the time, again, I did have an agent, and he said, this ain't happening. So it took me 6 months to trim it into what David, my agent, thought was submissible shape. And he was right. You know, he said, this doesn't work. Well, you don't need this subplot or whatever. And then he went through the submission process, and this isn't what you asked, but to go on, I don't want to sound so bitter, but St. Martin's made a bid on the book, and I was like, I love St. Martin's. They published my first book, Texas Music, and then the editor who wanted to acquire Gris-Gris Gumbo got fired, and that was the end of that. Now, y'all will dig this, particularly since we're all up here in New York, and in Connecticut, and Eileen and I are from the South. We really did appreciate the irony of this. Then a publisher called Kensington made a bid on Gris-Gris Gumbo, and we said, we'll do it. We like what they said. And what happens after the editor says, I want to your agent, yeah, I would like to acquire this. Well, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. Then they have to take it to what they call a marketing meeting. And every week, all of the editors that work for the publishing house go in with all of the advertising and marketing people, and they go around in a circle, and they say, what do you got? What do you want to do? And I've got a book about voodoo in New Orleans called Gris-Gris Gumbo. And one of the marketing guys raises his hand as it was described to me and says, you know what? A lot of our books in the South are marketed through the Walmart chain. We have a big distribution situation with Walmart. And there's no way in hell that Walmart in the South will put a book about voodoo on their shelves. And you'll remember this day. We got a call from my agent, and we were going to go to the Dutch Tavern to celebrate. And Dave, the agent, says, I got bad news. And I said, what could possibly happen? And he said, well, Walmart down there in the South doesn't want any books about voodoo. And how long was it before we ever set foot in a Walmart again? We did set foot in one again because we needed peanuts or something. We were driving to Atlanta, where we had arranged to adopt our dog Gumbo, and we needed something going through South Carolina, where I was like, oh, all there is Walmart. Well, let's just do it. So we went in, and here's what I remember about it. Do y'all go into the Walmarts up here? Sure, right? What do you think of the gun department? Oh, wait, there isn't one, is there? The one we went into South Carolina was like the size of this room and beyond. All along the right side of the Walmart was nothing but guns and firearms. And I was like, we're back in the South. Anyway, so there's that. I went on way too long with your answer, but yes. Hi, Jan, who brought me some okra.
Speaking of, you're from the South, do you consider yourself a Southern writer? And if so, what distinguishes a Southern writer?
That's a really cool question. First of all, I haven't had anywhere near any form of success that would, to have the sort of response that would let me know if I was a Southern writer. The first 2 books were nonfiction books, Texas music and Louisiana music. So by definition, they were books about the South. Gris-Gris Gumbo is about the South. I wrote, and I had a wonderful book publishing party here for a novel that came out 12 years ago called Poppin' a Cold One. And bless the Groton Public Library, because a large part of that book, which was a comic crime novel, was centered around a necrophiliac mortician. And I thought, you know what? It's pretty cool that a public library, and I probably shouldn't have broached that with the young lady in here. I'm sorry. Don't let her look up what that means. But that was decidedly Southern. That was Southern. That took place in Mississippi. But I've had 3 books that aren't published, novels, and all of those take place in New England that I wrote after Eileen and I moved up here and got comfortable and realized. Do y'all know the country singer, the Americana singer, Robert Earl Keen? Anybody heard of Robert Earl? Jim, you got to know him. He's one of the best songwriters in the world. He's a Texas guy. He has this song, and there's a in Mexico who left his family in Texas running from the DEA, and the guy singing the song meets the drug dealer in this little Mexican border town, and they go to the drug dealer's little cabin there and smoke a joint, and the drug dealer says, "I like it just fine here. I ain't ever going back." And that's what Eileen and I figured out pretty early on about New England as compared to the South. We ain't ever going back. So maybe I'm a northern writer now. I don't know. Does that make sense? Hi, Bruce. Oh, wait, you want to go first? I'm moving over because I'm deaf, and I might not be able to hear you. What's up?
Do you have any advice for publishing a book?
I do have advice. Are you a writer?
Yeah, I'm thinking of publishing my first book.
Look at your shirt. You literally mean figuratively. So you're already more advanced than I am. I do. And I'll bet Alyssa would, and Kathleen, another former colleague that wrote for a living, don't ever stop reading. Don't ever stop writing. You cannot allow yourself to get frustrated or beaten down. Have fun. You're inventing worlds, and you're going to get better because that's what happens when you work at it. And I think if I had known at your age that I wanted to be a writer, or for that matter, a musician, which I spent 15 years doing, or as some would say, wasted 15 years doing. If I'd known that as early as you are, man, sky's the limit. Do it. And what grade are you in? 7th. Do you have teachers that will specifically focus on creative writing yet? Are you a teacher? Fabulous. Well, you're set. You got an in-home instructor, and are you having fun with it? Have you finished a book yet? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm sorry?
I've been writing since I was really little.
Well, you're still kind of little, but well, good for you. And you know what? If you ever would like me to look at it, I would be more than happy to do it, and I won't tear it up with horrible notes or anything like she does to me.
Excuse me.
But
I would say, if you don't mind me saying, I would get other people's opinion, but always stay true to yourself. If you know something needs to be there, maybe rework it a little bit, but it's good to get other people's opinions, but stick to what you know and what you want to do. Make that world yours. So I'll give you his email address afterwards.
yeah, well, good for you. I'm proud of you. Bruce?
I have a couple questions. One is, you said that you shelved it, right? You put it on the shelf for several years. So how old were you when you wrote it?
I couldn't hear you.
How old were you when you
How old
wrote
were
it?
you when you wrote the book?
Gris-Gris Gumbo? Let's see, I'm 92 now. I was probably early 50s.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you wrote it, did you do the story and then figure out how to make it accurate? Or did you do the research first to create the characters that were accurate?
Did everybody hear that? That's a cool question, Bruce. And that's part of the fun of fiction. I mean, you can't just, I guess you could just make crazy stuff up, but it has to be rooted in some sort of authenticity because a smart reader is gonna see through it, particularly if you're doing something culturally or geographically specific, where anybody that's been there can say, this person's mailing it in. They didn't do. I spent, as I said, I know New Orleans really well, and I wanted to be accurate. I wanted to reflect the sounds and the scents and the food and the music of the city. I wanted to be accurate to a certain extent with the voodoo, which I was, but also it's a horror novel. I want to scare the heck out of people. And so I took certain Gris-Gris is a spell. That's what it means. And it's not pronounced Gris-Gris, and that's okay if you think it is, because that's what it looks like. But a Gris-Gris is a spell. And I took certain Gris-Gris spells, and some of them are pretty weird. Like if you, I'm not going to tell you any of that stuff. I'm just not. But I would take certain spells and just then I could let my imagination run wild, and I had a lot of fun with that. And I don't know if you were like this, Alyssa, but when you were writing Happy Hour, but I'm pretty much my biggest fan, you know, and sometimes I'd be in my office, which is next door at our house to Eileen's office, because she writes a lot of material, college admissions material. And she hear me cackling, and she goes, "What the hell is this guy doing now? Who did you kill now? How did you kill them?" Etc. And so there, particularly with horror, you got to make some of it up, right? Or did I? No. And so was that your first question, or?
Yeah, no, that was good.
That was it?
Yeah.
All right.
Because I think that, like, in the book, like when you go to the cemeteries and you go to different restaurants, and when I was in New Orleans, we went to a couple of them.
Yes.
It's just, I think it's interesting to tie that stuff together for the reader,
Yeah.
and it becomes even more interesting. You can go and visit things.
Right.
But my last question is, I read it and think, oh, this is an 8-part, like, perfect for Netflix, like a perfect, like, so I think you did investigate it. Is it still possible that it could end up being like something?
I'm not sure what to say about that, or how much to say. Thank you for the compliment. And from before there was streaming, Eileen was saying this should be a weekly TV show. It's episodic. It's got several adventures, whatever. I certainly wasn't thinking that when I wrote it. I don't outline my fiction, and that's sort of the fun of it too. If you're listening, is you might think you know where you're going, and there are plenty of novelists that write 200-page outlines, and they know everything that's going to happen to every character. And then when they finish the outline, they just write, and in 6 weeks they're done with it. And there's millions of them that are bestsellers, so there's nothing wrong with that. I don't have the patience to plot it out. I don't know what's going to happen. I have an idea and some characters that I think are fun, and I just like to throw them out there and see what happens. And I guess the agents and the editors that I've queried don't think it's near as entertaining as I do, but yeah, it's just. Oh yeah. What I cold called. I sent a copy of a book to someone. I'm not going to say who they are. Who's very successful screenwriter that I have met, and a lot of the stuff he has written is very dark or supernatural. And to my surprise, he called me on the phone and he said, this is a quote, "This is one of the best horror novels I've ever read in my life." And it being him, I was pretty freaked out. And I said, "What are you going to do about it?" Because I have no agent. And he was finishing a project at the time, and he said, let me think about it. You got a couple of extra copies? I'll hand them out if I see someone that looks interested. And I said, sure. And I sent them to him, and that was last October. And I don't know, it was a month ago. A month ago, I got an email from him saying, "Do you have a one-page synopsis of Gris-Gris Gumbo?" I said, "I don't have any idea. I don't remember. I wrote it and queried about it 20 years ago, but I'll try to find one." And I did. Astonishingly enough, it was something that still existed in spite of my inability to operate a computer or storage or anything. So I emailed it to him. And then 2 days later, he emailed me and he said, "I want to let you know what's going on." I pitched this to MGM Plus. Is that the name of the company? One of those companies that does streaming for Apple or whatever. I don't know. They were looking for a series about witches. And if you read the book, there is a voodoo yen, a dark sorceress at the heart of this book. And depending on how wide your definition of witch is, she fits, you can say, yeah, she's a witch. So he goes, so I pitched it to these people one-on-one. And it turned out the guy that he pitched it to said, "This is pretty great, but I want a Salem, Massachusetts sort of witch." And I said, "Well, I didn't know you were going to do any of this, so it's pretty fast. And I'm sorry he didn't want it, but I was still sort of exhilarated that he liked it enough to pitch it." And I had told him when he wanted, I said, you can try to sell this to the guy in the gun department at Walmart, whatever, And he said, the guy that was trying to sell it for me, that's had some success, said, "Would you be willing to change one of the male lead from a white guy to a black guy?" I said, "You can change him to a 12-foot kangaroo. I don't care, just do it." But he says, basically, I gave him carte blanche. If you like the book, and I know you got your own stuff, go for it. So that's the last I've heard about it. He just said, the boots are on the ground. So I'll be in touch if I need you. And I don't expect to ever hear from him again. But again, in this business, if an agent answers your query, which 95% of them will not even bother with the email. They don't bother. They just say, if you don't hear from us, we don't want it. It gets to be a currency where, say you got an agent that actually responded and said, "Dear Rick, I read with interest your sample. I think it's a good idea, and maybe they refer to the character in it. This Crayton guy is really cool. It doesn't fit my profile, and I'm going to pass on it. But it's interesting. Keep at it. Man, after a while, after 200 rejections, you get something like that. It's like currency. It's like you go, man, this is a real guy or woman that liked one of the characters. And that's how soul crushing it is, because even though it's a rejection, they took the time to personally say no and write enough to let you know they had read it. So the point is, Bruce, I sent this off. The guy likes it. Who knows if he'll do anything else with it? Thank you for the crossed fingers. But that's a form of currency. I feel like, this is someone that's a professional that has had work produced internationally, and he liked it enough to pitch it to somebody. So maybe that's, yes.
I can solidify something very rare.
Maybe my favorite book of all time is a book called A Confederacy of Dunces, and it's by a guy named John Kennedy Toole. Michael, Beth, it's about as good as it gets, right? And it is funny, and it, just by chance, it happens to be about New Orleans, but it's not about voodoo. It's a picaresque novel, a comic literary masterpiece, and he couldn't get it published, and he tried and he tried and he came so close, and finally it was too much, and he did away with himself. And after he passed, his mother took a mimeograph copy of it to LSU. They lived in New Orleans, to the great writer Walker Percy, who was teaching at LSU at the time. And she bugged him and said, my son was a genius. You've got to read this. And he finally said, you know what? Just to get the old woman to leave me alone, he agreed to look at it. And he said, you know what? She's right. This is one of the best books I've ever read. And he got it published after hundreds of rejections by LSU Press, a small college press, and it won the Pulitzer Prize long after this guy was gone. That's a depressing long answer, but there's so many good artists out there, and it makes me think, the guy that asked the question is my good friend Lee Elsey, who played AA baseball in the Cardinals organization, wonderful athlete. And there comes a point when being talented, or no matter how hard you work, there's an element of luck that comes into it. I think if you're going to be a neurosurgeon or a landscape architect or whatever, and you work and you work and you work and you get better and better, you're probably going to be a top-notch neurosurgeon or a landscape architect. That's not good enough in the arts, unfortunately. You need that bit of lightning strike. And all of you read here, or you presumably wouldn't be in here. To answer your question, I think I can write. Sure, I can write. I'm pretty good at it. Am I great? No. There are so many great writers. But there are people worse than me, and there are people worse than Alyssa, and I'm not saying you're not good too, that are on top of the bestseller charts. They have no business being there, in my opinion.
Rick,
Yeah.
theoretical physics is no picnic either.
Is that you, Bill?
That's me.
Yeah, you would know that. He's an engineer with theories in theoretical physics that we have tried to get attention paid to. But anyway, yes, you get my point. So there are a million great actors, a million great athletes. Some of them make it, some of them don't. Some people that maybe aren't as talented make it because they got lucky, and that's okay too. That's the way it goes. But does that answer your question, Lee? Probably way more than you wanted.
I have more. Sweets.
Yes.
What do you have cooking next?
I have a book called Pagan Milkshake that I finished 4 years ago. That's the one that I sent out 202 queries, and I got an agent, a good agent. That took me about a year to get the agent sending out those queries. He's the one that gave me 30 opportunities and said, this isn't going to work. In the meantime, I started writing a book called Death Mask. It's a comic crime novel. I think it's the best thing I've ever written. I finished it about the time Gris-Gris Gumbo out of nowhere got published, and then I spent a year trying to do anything for that. So even though it's finished, Death Mask just sort of sat there because I only have so many hours a day that I can devote to writing queries or sending copies of this book off. And I'm a writer. I write all day long at the day newspaper. And I sort of subscribe to the theory that you have X amount of creative energy every day. And I used to get up at 5 and write about the stuff for me, but I'd rather sleep now. So I write at night, and I run out of energy. But I have an idea for 2 new books that I would like to write, and I'm almost 70. I don't know how much, who knows, but I really would like to give Death Mask a shot. So reluctantly, I have started the querying process on that. And I can't do that and write any of the new books. I just don't have the time right now. But Pagan Milkshake and Death Mask, I think they're perfectly publishable books. I don't know, but so yes.
Would you be willing to go in a similar fashion to publish these as you did with Gris-Gris Gumbo? A small.
The good thing about getting published with Gris-Gris Gumbo is horror is an incredibly popular subgenre. And if you're a fan of horror novels or horror fiction like I am, we tend to think of ourselves as kooks. Kooks being, I'm willing to spend money on any of these small publishing houses because the big publishing houses, even though horror is sort of on an upswing, it's still anathema. It's like not much respect there. So if you're a horror fan, like you're a comic book fan or a fan of superhero movies, you'll do anything to get your hands on this stuff. And that's one way of saying there's a proliferation of small horror publishing houses that you can submit to. Neither one of the books that we were just talking about, Pagan Milkshake or Death Mask, are horror. So that's a different landing spot. It's not as easy to find an independent publishing house. I'll try, but there's not that many of them out there. And if you're going to start one, hi Jim, what's up?
Hey, Rick, you touched on kind of forced voodoo and the real deal shop in New Orleans.
Hold on, I'm deaf as hell.
You touched briefly on the forced voodoo and the real deal shops are outside of the quarter in New
Right.
Orleans. And I was thinking about the musicians and the music that's so much part of your book. There's always kind of a performative aspect to people like Dr. John or Coco Robichaux or
Right.
Willie DeVille, who moved down there for
Yeah.
a while. where it's not that they're not sincere in their practice, or it's not, all-encompassing in their music, but there's this kind of shtick that goes along with it too.
Yeah.
And even in Haiti, you see it with the politicians.
Right.
How did you deal with that aspect in your book? How did you find that balance of not making it shtick and not having it be too reverential to get that kind of playful aspect without being chintzy?
Did everybody hear that well enough? Thanks, Jim. Well, first of all, you alluded to two musicians that I love a lot, Dr. John and Coco Robichaux. And both of those guys actually were adherents of voodoo. And you probably know that, but they really were voodoo followers. In fact, Dr. John, who had an album called Gris-Gris and a song called Gris-Gris Gumbo, I wonder where I got the title. Oh, I know. He owned a voodoo shop in the 9th Ward for a while. So there is, I suppose you, in the South, if I saw a Baptist minister, and I went to Baylor, which is the largest Baptist college in the country, I think if I saw a Baptist minister, I'd go, there's a Baptist minister. So there's a certain look towards it. But the accoutrements of voodoo that they wear and ceremonies and stuff are very distinctive, very colorful. So there is shtick to it, like what Dr. John wore on stage, and you can Google it and see what he looked like on stage, particularly back when he was singing the songs from Gris-Gris Gumbo. It was an over-the-top medicine show type thing where he worked on the costumes and that sort of thing. It's also borrows heavily from the Mardi Gras Indians, the feathered outfits and stuff. It all intermingles. So I think what I'm trying to say is I'm not sure where in real life the shtick ends and the real person begins, if that makes any sense. So I just went with it and tried not to be disrespectful or silly, try to be as authentic as personal as possible, given that I was going to have some crazy supernatural stuff happen, if that makes any sense. Yeah. Anybody else? Anybody bring any gumbo? Oh, yes.
No, I didn't take it. You didn't downplay it, and I know you're talking about Gris-Gris Gumbo, but your Louisiana music is a wonderful book.
Thank you.
Like you're talking tonight, it's story upon story upon story in your musicians.
That's a very nice compliment. I appreciate it, and it was a lot of fun to write that book. And Eileen and I were watching a documentary the other day on the history of Jazz Fest, and it wasn't with any ego or anything, but I turned to her at one point because it's a documentary, so you have footage and then you have interviews with various artists that have been part of Jazz Festival over the years or are particularly active in New Orleans or Louisiana music. And I looked at Eileen and I said, I've interviewed 90% of these people, and it was not because I got to write the book, and as such, I was able to do this, but I thought, how cool and special is it that I got to meet all of these wonderful artists? So if I was able in the book to convey my affection anecdotally and my respect for the music, then I'm glad. So thank you. Well, I hope so. Thank you.
This is just a small gratitude from the Groton Public Library for
Oh my God.
time and writing such great work.
Well, thank you very much. And listen, thank you guys. You came out on a hot Tuesday night, and it means the world to me. And libraries are the best things in the world. Thank you guys. The last thing I will say is it's your tough luck that if you had been on the Connecticut Author Trail 60 years ago, you wouldn't be seeing me. You'd be seeing Wallace Stevens. 80 years ago, Mark Twain, Eugene O'Neill. You got me. All right. Thank you all.